All right, everybody, welcome back to Archaeology with Flint Dibble. And we're here, we're going to try to switch up the timings occasionally in some of these live streams over the next week. Oh, Michael, oh, there you are.
Yeah.
No, all good. So we're here today to talk about some of the stuff that's been in the news, this kind of Vesuvius challenge that has been using machine learning to decipher the handwriting and digitally unwrap these scrolls from Herculaneum. And joining us is Dr. Michael McOsker, who is a researcher at University College London, and he's a papyrologist and a philologist. So he studies ancient textual sources, and he works with the Vesuvius Challenge team, doing the papyrology side of things and the philology side of things. So Michael, it's really good to have you. Tell me if I need to fix anything I said about you.
Thanks for having me on. No, that sounded all pretty good.
Okay, good. So how long have you been working on this project with the Herculaneum scrolls?
So it's been, I think, just over a year.
Okay, just over a year.
Well, I've been with the Vesuvius Challenge for just over a year. I've been doing work on the Herculaneum papyri since 2010.
Okay, as part of your PhD and stuff like that. Yeah. So we can walk through kind of what you used to be able to do versus what's going on now, the more traditional versus this new methods, and what it can tell for us and why it's kind of cool, I think.
Yeah.
So for context for everybody, Herculaneum is a city, a little Roman town that's just north of Pompeii, and it's near to Vesuvius. So it was destroyed during the eruption in 79 AD. And because it was within the pyroclastic flow, it's extremely well preserved. If you've been to Pompeii and not been to Herculaneum, I recommend people go to Herculaneum because you get a sense of multiple stories, for example, that you don't get as clearly at Pompeii. And this is from the Villa of the Papyri, which we'll be talking about, which is a quite large and well-decorated and appointed villa within the town. Well-decorated with wall paintings, and it had storage facilities. The people that lived there were fairly wealthy, if you will. They were among the elites of the Roman world. And so, Michael, do you want to talk us through these papyri and where they're found and what's going on with this building?
Yeah. Okay. So this is a plan of the Villa of the Papyri, or at least of what was known of it in the 1750s. So the building was discovered early in the 18th century, basically by well diggers. The whole area below Vesuvius, between Vesuvius and the ocean, is just packed with Roman stuff that was buried in the eruption. So there's actually a pretty good chance that if you dig deep enough, you're going to hit something Roman there. And that's what happened, actually. And it was sort of extremely lucky. So a well digger sunk a well and hit that little circular thing that I think is at the far left of the plan that you see. And it's a little sort of gazebo belvedere that looks out over the Bay of Naples, connected by a walkway to the main body of the villa. And so when they realized, they hit a nice mosaic pavement, and then they realized that this was going to be a pretty important building, and they brought in a military engineer. Weber was a Swiss military engineer who was working for the King of Naples to supervise the excavations. So this is the ground plan of the villa. It's extremely well done, but to get to the papyri, they had to go from that little belvedere all the way through this huge peristyle into the sort of main body of the villa, which is there. And they first started finding papyri in 1752 in the room that we call the tablinum, which is the sort of square structure between the big peristyle and the square.
Is that what I'm circling right here?
So that's the atrium, and then the tablinum is going to be sort of along its center line out towards the big peristyle.
Okay, so over here.
The other way.
Other way, over
here. That's it, right there.
Oh, okay.
So a bunch of papyri were found in and around that room. um, both both in Greek and Latin, according to the dig diaries. And as they moved further into the building, so scrolling, I think right, they found a treasure trove in a small room on the other side of the atrium. It is commonly referred to as either room 16 or the library, because that's where most of the papyri were found. And again, probably both Greek and Latin papyri were found there, according to the diary. They stopped finding papyri in 1754. And the villa ceased being dug a little bit after that, partly because Pompeii was easier to dig, partly because it seemed like they'd gotten most of the statuary and cool displayable stuff out of it, partly because they were worried that it would collapse, because most of the villa is, in fact, still underground, under about 30 meters of rubble and volcanic matter.
Yeah, which this I gotta boot it up again.
Yeah.
But this photo of you're in the tunnel here.
Yeah, that's so I'm actually in the villa in that picture, and you can see the you know, how small and cramped the tunnels are. If you zoom in on the floor, you can see a little black on white mosaic pattern. It's
right here.
it was difficult working conditions, and I don't really blame them for not enjoying it.
Yeah, and I mean you can see how it's dug down, how far below the modern city that needs to be dug down to get to this kind of stuff. So it is a very kind of dangerous dig in order to do. So okay, so wait, somebody asked what's a papyri. So
Yeah.
let's quickly just boot up this image here. So what we're talking about is scrolls made out of the papyrus plant. And there are these rolled up scrolls that would be in a library here. How many scrolls approximately have they found in this excavation?
We don't actually know, but
Okay.
somewhere in the neighborhood of 400 to 600.
Wow. So 400 to 600 in a sense books, if you think about it like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So papyrus is a reed that grows primarily in the Nile Delta. You can process it and make basically paper out of it, and that was the normal writing material of the ancient world.
And unrolled, it'll kind of look like this.
Yep.
You can see that it's woven together in a sort of hash-like pattern to create the surface upon which
Yep.
people wrote. And so this is kind of the one of the most important writing materials from the ancient world, but it only preserves typically in Egypt, except in this situation, we have a fortunate situation due to the eruption of the volcano where these got charred, but not carbonized, but not completely disintegrated to ash so that they were recoverable
Yeah,
in
that's
those
right.
kind of rolled up scrolls. Yeah.
So yeah, so it's organic matter. It'll normally rot if it gets damp at all. Egypt is dry enough, right? The desert in Egypt is dry enough that it survives there. There are a few other deserts that are dry enough, right? That's why the Dead Sea Scrolls survived in Israel, and there are some papyrus finds from Israel and the Near East. And in Herculaneum, they were carbonized and then buried, and the volcanic material was impermeable to water, so they stayed dry. It was just stacks of basically charcoal books.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
So
I think.
this, yeah, so
Well, I was going to say, so most papyrologists work on Egyptian material because there's so much of it. But your specialization is the material from Herculaneum and elsewhere. What do you focus on?
I do both.
A little bit of both.
My
Okay.
day job is on the Egyptian material. This is my side hustle, my nights and weekends gig.
Fair enough. We got your side hustle
Yeah.
going on. That's how you got to do it as an academic these days.
Yeah. So what we're looking at here is a bit of a work on poetry by an Epicurean philosopher named Demetrius Laco. And this is a picture I took on whatever iPhone I owned back in 2013. Right, it's a normal light photograph just taken in the library in Naples, but nothing special going on. It's just a cell phone photo. The next
And
one,
so, just a quick
yeah,
question, pretty much all the Herculaneum papyri, they're stored at the museum in Naples?
that's right. There
Okay.
are a few were handed out as diplomatic gifts. So
Okay.
there are a couple in Paris, a couple ended up in the UK. So there are a couple in London and a couple in Oxford in the Bodleian, a couple in Denmark. But yeah, the vast majority of them are in the library in Naples.
Okay. And then so this is one of them from Herculaneum. So this must have been very carefully unrolled from that carbonized scroll?
That's right. The Shortly after the papyri were discovered, they started physically opening them, originally by just sort of cutting them in half. Um, Thankfully, they realized that that wasn't a good way of going about things. And the Vatican librarian, a guy named Father Piaggio, developed a technique for unrolling them. And so this was unrolled on Piaggio's machine. And you can see the vertical stripes on it
Mhm.
are actually cracks, right? Because they
Okay.
were stored rolled up in cylindrical form. And as they unrolled, you'd peel off a bit, and then it would crack, and then you'd peel off another bit, and it would crack. So the papyrus doesn't lay flat. You can actually see some shadows from
Mhm,
um,
mhm.
the surface texture and topography. But basically, it's the scalloped shape,
Okay.
um, and that's part of the reason we're trying not to unroll. Right, we're not physically unrolling them anymore because it causes damage to the rolls. We lose letters, we lose information.
I
Uh,
imagine back several hundred years ago, a significant number of them were accidentally destroyed in order to try to figure out how to unroll these.
yeah, probably a couple dozen at least. The
Okay.
dig diary, or the not the dig diaries, the letters written by the excavators during the excavation say that they threw a bunch away because they thought it was just old firewood or rolled up fishing nets or something like that. They didn't realize what they were.
Aha, of course, yeah, it's the first time you find something like this, and
Yeah,
diggers are not gonna know, yeah.
and it didn't. It wasn't statuary. It didn't look valuable, so there wasn't much point in
It's just a
investigating it.
lump of a black
Unfortunately,
fragile lump, really, and
yeah.
so
Um,
huh.
we know that a bunch were destroyed in various experiments to figure out ways of opening them. We don't know how many, but a couple dozen. Um,
Okay. So if you're a researcher and you get access to an archive where some of the unrolled ones are stored, this is basically what it looks like.
yeah.
This looks really easy to read.
Well, this is one of the easier ones. Uh, so, for if you zoom in,
Mhm.
um, you can actually see some letters in ink. Right, the ink is black, the papyrus is brown.
So here's like a tau
The tau,
maybe.
exactly.
Yeah,
Um, it's not
gamma.
great, but you can see some letters. This is easy because this part of this papyrus is actually in pretty good shape. It unrolled pretty cleanly. This papyrus is a brown color. A lot of them are black, like actually black. So then you're trying to read the like the glossy black ink against a matte black background, and
And
that's
the ink would
basically
have been made
impossible.
out of ash as well, right,
So yeah,
perhaps? So
carbon
you have
carbon.
basically ink made of ash on carbonized papyrus that's ash.
Yeah, it's
That
all
sounds
carbon.
I
That's I
took
mean that's
papyr
that's
I
that's
took
why finding the ink in the X-rays is so hard because it's all basically the same material now.
as a PhD student, I took papyrology with Peter Van Minnen, and
Yeah,
part of what we had to do was take an image of an unpublished papyrus or a papyrus that the edition had been published so long ago that it was so out of date. And I mean, we didn't have to do the Herculaneum scrolls; we were doing some from Egypt. But I can tell everybody you have to imagine reading really sloppy handwriting in a foreign language and shorthand, and then you have this issue of ash on ash.
yeah.
And papyrologists, I don't know how any of you have sanity left. To be honest, that was enough for me. One grad level class, and I was like, "This is not what I want to do for my career."
Maybe we don't. um, so it does get a little bit better. So you want to queue up the next?
Yeah, wait. There we go.
So this
The
is that
one.
same chunk of papyrus in an infrared photo, right? Exactly the same chunk. These were made by.
Here, wait. Let me just show people that it's the same chunk. You go back, you see these streamers going down here, and boom, you can see it's the exact same chunk, just zoomed in some. Just got to prove it to everybody.
Yeah, no, that's fine. So these were made by a team from Brigham Young University around 2000 to 2003. They pretty much went through and photographed the whole collection. And this is, you can see, way easier to read.
And yet still not easy unless
Still
you're
not
a
easy.
trained papyrologist and you have some experience with paleography.
Yeah. So yeah, not great. The main part of this where it's preserved and you can read at least most of every letter on each line goes pretty quickly. If you scroll down, trying to figure out what's going on down here is really hard.
Yeah, I can imagine.
It's okay. So I think we can move on.
Yeah.
This is what the outermost chunk of that same roll looks like. So you can tell if we zoom in, it's the same handwriting.
So is this the other side of it? Is that what we're flipping on?
This would be the outside of the roll.
Okay.
And the last slide was from near the center of the roll.
Okay, so it's just a different piece, but from the same roll.
Same roll, yeah.
Yeah.
So this would have been more exposed to the eruption. It would have been probably, jostled harder when they were moving it during the excavation. But as you can see, it's just a mess, right? If you look at it, you see a lot of letters, but then the more you look at it, you realize like, oh, there are no columns, right? The ancient text was laid out in columns. There are no column breaks. Or you look and it looks like letters are getting cut off in the middle or overlapping each other. And that's because layers of the papyrus have stuck to each other. It didn't unroll cleanly as one sheet. It came off in chunks that were just being torn out because Piaget's machine wasn't delicate and sensitive enough to unroll it layer by layer. And it might be impossible to physically unroll it layer by layer.
Yeah, that certainly makes sense, especially given what it is. We have a quick question from the chat asking about the language. They're asking if it's Demotic. For other people, before you answer, Demotic is a version of Egyptian language written in Greek characters, but I don't think this is Demotic, I'm guessing. So do you want to tell them?
No, this is just ancient Greek. Okay. Most of the papyri, north of 95% of the papyri in the Herculaneum library are in ancient Greek. The other ones, the remainder are in Latin.
Okay.
We haven't found anything other than Greek or Latin there.
Yeah. And in Egypt, you have a lot of Demotic scrolls, obviously.
Yeah, and depending on when you cite other stuff too, right? Like
hieroglyphs and
Coptic, earlier Egyptian, Coptic, Persian, Aramaic, Hebrew, Arabic, all sorts of.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Okay.
Yep. So that you can see it's not clean. It's just a mess. It's basically impossible to do anything useful with. You can barely read words. You can barely even guess what some words.
So it's like an archaeological palimpsest in a sense. It's like a palimpsest, but like created due to taphonomy.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So the next one is a better preserved papyrus. The next photo. This is Philodemus's On Anger. I just wanted to show you what a better preserved scroll looks like. So this actually preserves the tops and bottoms of the column. There's damage, but a much more substantial amount of connected text. The top bit is mounted a little too far from the middle bit. So we're actually not missing that much between the top and the bottom. Probably what happened is the roll was sort of slightly banana shaped, and the top bit where it curved snapped off at some point. But they knew that they were supposed to go together, so they were kept together.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so let's walk through. You have been working on these papyri, you said, since like over 10 years.
Yeah.
So before some of these new digital methods were used, what was your PhD working with on these papyri? Let's walk
So,
into a little bit about what these papyri are about, let's say.
sure. So my PhD thesis, which is now, glad I pulled this off the shelf earlier, now been published.
Aha.
That's not going to work. It's called The Good Poem According to Philodemus.
Got a link for the book in the chat.
Yep.
But you keep going, yeah.
From Oxford University Press. Philodemus is the author that wrote most of the rolls recovered in the Herculaneum library. He was an Epicurean. Among the works that he wrote was an On Poems, basically setting out the Epicurean view about poetry in a pretty extensive way. And I happened to be in graduate school with the editor of the On Poems, and it seemed like a good idea to do a sort of reconstruction of the philosophical positions to accompany his work on the Greek text. So that was my PhD thesis. I started it in 2010 and finished
So
it
just
in
to
2015.
step back for a second, the good poem and Epicureanism, you mean like these people like to live a good life. They like to eat,
Yep.
drink, and be merry.
Yep. So
Okay, good. I like
Epicureanism,
that
yeah,
too.
exactly. A little more complicated, but yeah, that's the gist. While writing that, I lived in Naples for a year and a half to work on the papyri in person, which
Okay,
was the big
very
thing.
valuable.
And I also, during that time, started editing Philodemus's On Anger. So I also pulled that one down. Not that it's going to be visible.
Yeah, your green screen.
Yeah, oh well. I did that with David Armstrong, who's an emeritus professor at the University of Texas in Austin. There we edited the Greek text. We tried to reconstruct the Epicurean views on anger, right? Anger is bad usually, but it can be good and useful in some circumstances. The difficulty is distinguishing the good anger from the bad anger and acting appropriately in both cases.
So you act appropriately by suppressing your anger and eating good food and with good people.
Yeah, unless it's appropriate anger, right? If somebody has harmed you, then anger is appropriate to motivate you to punish wrongdoing, right? Not get revenge, but to punish wrongdoing.
So you're saying my anger about the people that harass me is justified.
Yeah.
But if I was angry at somebody who was not doing that, then I should just chill out and have a nice meal.
Exactly.
Okay. Yeah. I like this philosophy. I can get behind it.
It's pretty reasonable. They were pretty reasonable guys.
Better than stoicism. I'd rather embrace my emotions and think through the right way to handle them than to.
So yeah, then I've been working on the Demetrius that I showed you, and some other projects in and around the papyri, up through my last position, and then this one I switched over to work primarily on the Egyptian material.
Okay. And so let's walk us through then this library. How many scrolls before this new modern technology that we're about to get to have been unraveled in a way that makes them readable? How many do we have that are actually readable, let's say, before this project started?
Well, remember when I said that they started unrolling them by cutting them up? So they're all in lots of pieces. And often those pieces got different inventory numbers. So there are about 1,840 inventory numbers.
Okay.
And some of those are one whole scroll. and in other cases, you need to combine 8 or 10 of them to reconstruct one scroll. So the real answer is we don't know.
Okay,
Um,
but we have sort of a sense that it's less than that number of 100 whatever, and
definitely less than 1,800. Got
yeah,
to be a couple hundred.
couple hundred that are readable. And how many of
Yeah.
them have been published and with editions and translations and stuff like that?
Well published, I'd say maybe a dozen or two.
So not many. So this
Not
is a
many.
real trove. This library in itself, A, from the ones that have been unraveled,
Yeah,
and from the ones that are still being analyzed digitally. There's a lot still to go through to understand what's in this one of the most complete libraries from the ancient world.
yeah, that's
Um,
right. I mean,
and
and
so,
I
yeah,
say well edited, right? So I have the benefit of the infrared photos and nice, binocular telescopes with LED light rings and all that. There are a lot of editions where the editors were just, you know, hunched over the papyrus, hoping that it didn't cloud over that afternoon.
just eyeballing it. Yeah, with
Yeah.
some light coming in from the side, raking light. Yeah,
Yep.
yeah.
So lots of partial editions or old editions that need updating and correcting, but like actual good up to the standards of what we can achieve now, not very many.
Okay, and so how would you characterize the library based off of what is known about it? What is this library? Is it like going to like a public library today, where you have some, some biology and some
Yeah.
astronomy and some philosophy and some stuff like that? What is this?
So this is a really weird library. So I said it's better than 95% ancient Greek. All of the ancient Greek, with maybe 2 exceptions, are philosophical texts.
Okay.
The 2 exceptions are both really badly damaged fragmentary texts, and they name a lot of historical figures.
Hmm.
Like so they might be histories, but they might also just be philosophical texts that used historical figures as examples. Of those philosophical texts, there are about 5 by Chrysippus the Stoic, and all the rest are Epicurean.
Okay.
And of the Epicurean ones, the vast majority are by this guy Philodemus.
Okay. And
Um,
I feel like I've heard somewhere people have argued that this might have been Philodemus's library himself, or am I just making that up?
no, you're not.
Okay.
It's a weird. Well, it'd be a weird library because it's primarily his own books, and that's just not how academics work. Um, but we do know that it has to descend from his papers because
Okay.
it has his drafts in it. Um,
Aha.
so the most famous example of this is a work called The History of Plato's Academy. It was in the news a while ago because they thought they found Plato's gravesite in it. And so that's a roll like this, except there are bits written like physically on the back of the roll with little X's and crosses and stars and whatnot that correspond to the same signs on the front side. And so what he did is he drafted the text, and then when he revised it, he wrote the additional material on the back of the roll and then drew little marks to show where it needed to be inserted into the text in the
Huh.
final version, in the final copy.
That's fascinating. So it's basically you have a draft in progress with edits and notations and stuff like
Yep.
that for updating, for copying in the future to a more complete draft.
Yep.
Huh.
So that was on Philodemus's desk. It was his working copy when he was writing the history of Plato's Academy. So it's got to be from Philodemus's papers.
Okay.
How it ended up, right? So Philodemus is born around 110 BCE. He dies, 50 or 40 BCE. The Mount Vesuvius erupts
Yeah,
about
700.
120, 130 years after that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So there's a lot of time when stuff could have happened to his books
Hmm.
between his death and the eruption of Vesuvius.
Is he well known in other texts and other by other philosophers?
Not really.
So most of
So
what we know is because of this chance find that
yeah,
the
basically,
okay.
he also wrote poetry,
Hmm.
and we have some of his poetry in what's sometimes called the Palatine Anthology or the Greek Anthology. So short, witty, fun poems. Um, we have those. Cicero mentions him a couple times. Um, another historian of ancient philosophy named Diogenes Laertius mentions Philodemus's history of ancient
That makes sense.
philosophy.
Diogenes would.
Yeah.
You would hope.
Um, so
Just
we
why
knew
so
he,
people know Diogenes was someone who wrote the history of different philosophers. So
yeah,
you would hope that he'd be mentioned in there. Yeah.
yeah, very large, useful book actually.
Yeah.
Um, so we knew that he existed, and we knew that he was um, an Epicurean. We knew about when he lived. We even sort of knew who he was hanging out with in Italy, but we didn't have any of his prose works. We just had about three dozen epigrams.
Hmm. Hmm.
So the Herculaneum Library gave him all of his prose works that we know.
Okay.
Um,
And so I think sorry.
yeah, I
Go on.
think it's also maybe worth saying, since it came to mind, everything that we found in the Herculaneum Library is new to us. We didn't have any of these texts before reading the Herculaneum Papyri.
Okay, that makes sense. And that's actually kind of cool. So that then is a great introduction to the next section, which is what's happening right now. And I'll pull up that Guardian article that you were quoted in.
Yep.
And the cool thing we have right here is the name Philodemus right here. So we actually have the author's name that we're talking about translated with these new methods. So that's why this was in the news just a couple days ago, because his name showed up, which is kind of cool. So do you want to walk us through this process of what's going on now with the Vesuvius challenge and whatnot?
Yeah. So to the extent that I can handle the technical stuff.
Yeah.
So this first image is what we call P Herc 172. So P Herc stands for Papyrus Herculanensis, which is Latin for Herculaneum papyrus, and 172 is its inventory number. It is housed in the Bodleian Library in Oxford, and that's what it looks like. So you can see it's crumpled in places. It has a rough texture. You can see some of the papyrus texture a little bit. It was left rolled up. They didn't even try to unroll it back in the 18th and early 19th century, which is good for us because now we can do it in a non-damaging way.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So let's keep going. So these are so the guy in the pink is Stephen Parsons, who works for the Vesuvius Challenge. He's a computer scientist. The guy in the blue below him is Julian Schillinger, who won the first grand prize, was one of the team that won the first grand prize. And he also works for the Vesuvius Challenge now. And they are both, I believe, in the Diamond Light Source, which is a synchrotron in Oxfordshire, a little bit south of Oxford itself. And that basically produces X-rays, really powerful X-rays. And so on the right half of the image, what you're seeing in the bottom is P Herc 172 in a custom designed and 3D printed protective case. So the scroll is scanned, and then they 3D print this case so that it doesn't block the X-rays, but also protects the scroll during transit.
Just so I can make sure, this is a thin section in a sense. This is looking at it from the side. These are the rolls of the papyri rolled up, right?
You're looking at it from the top down.
Yeah, exactly. So it's rolling like this.
Yeah, you can see the internal structure of the what used to be a spiral.
Yeah, exactly.
So if you zoom in on that, you can see places where it's broken, where the rolling, was not done tightly or evenly. We think the papyrus contracted when it was carbonized, that water came out of it, and the papyrus contracted. So that might be why the outside is in worse condition than the inside. But that's part of the X-ray. That's taken from the X-ray data.
Okay.
And this is what happened when they first unrolled that. So what they do is they get the X-ray data and they process it, and they I have no idea how they do it, but they unroll it. And so here, this is a bit from inside the still rolled up Herculaneum papyrus. And what was exciting about this is when they looked at it, they thought they saw ink. Right? You can see the lighter bits that look kind of like letters. And in fact, those are letters. You can just read a little bit of Greek just in the X-ray data for this. We don't know why. We don't know why it hasn't turned up in the other rolls that have been scanned. We don't know why. I mean, here you can see it pretty clearly, every other line, but much more faintly in between. Maybe the scribe is re-inking his pen. We don't know. We don't know why it turned out that way.
Okay.
So that landed on my desk last November.
This one did.
Yep.
Okay.
And along with it, 2 other bits where they had run an ink detection algorithm. So those are these, to try to make the ink stand out a bit better. So the one on the right, outlined in blue, is actually the same bit of papyrus that you saw in the unrolled. And the one outlined in green is somewhere else. It's elsewhere in the roll. You can see, there's a papyrus break about a third of the way over in the green image. The ink isn't shown up very well. We can read some letters pretty confidently, maybe not some other ones. Lots of broken letters, lots of noise. So there's a lot of work to be done. But again, those were produced pretty much right off the bat as soon as they'd scanned the scroll. So that's the state of things as of last November.
Okay.
You can see, those are some more pictures of the internal structure, just showing some of the difficulty of even doing the physical unrolling and reconstruction. And then just down a little bit more, you can see this image, which up. Yeah.
This one, okay.
Yeah. This is the whole length of the roll unrolled.
Wow.
So you can see the repeated pattern of damage that's caused by the fact that the scroll is damaged more on one half than the other. So as it unrolls, that repeats but gets smaller until finally you get past the bit that was damaged. This has had the machine learning algorithm, the ink detection algorithm, run on it, but hardly anything is legible yet.
Yeah, I can tell. So I have a question about the layout of this. I've never seen something like this, actually. Are the columns up and down here, and then they go from left to right on the roll?
Exactly. So you would start with the bulk of the roll in your right hand and read a column, right? Each line you would read left to right. You would go from top to bottom, just right, like reading a page of a book. But instead of turning a page, you would unroll with your right hand and roll up with your left hand to literally scroll over to the next column. And the columns would be consistently sized, right? Roughly the same number of letters per line, same space on the page, right? All of that makes it look nice. And then at the end, there's going to be some blank space. At the beginning, there was some blank space. The author and title were listed at both the beginning and end of the roll, so that if somebody didn't rewind it, as it were, to the beginning, you could still see what book it was just by glancing at the
And
the
so I'm
bit that
guessing
was
you sort of
reversed.
maneuver it, you unroll part and then you roll up as you finish in order to have it on a table. That's it. Like reading a book would be a lot more difficult than today, I suppose.
Yeah, it always requires two hands,
Yeah,
or
yeah.
putting it on a table with like weights or something, or having somebody else read it to you.
So okay, so how much material have you been handed from? So how does it? How do you have a back and forth with this? Do you take sort of already digitally readable images, and then your role would be to start to translate it and interpret what it is, and add context and relevance and how it fits in with the library and the greater corpus of written texts?
So that's basically my job. The
Okay.
way it the way it works, I mean, the way we end up with written text is they find something on the roll that we're pretty sure is ink, and that can be used to train a machine learning algorithm.
Hmm.
Um, and so in this roll, it was easy because we could just read some letters, right? So we could tell the algorithm, this is ink, learn what this looks like and find it everywhere else.
Yeah.
And we got some results from that. And then from those results, we can keep iterating and give the algorithm more and better data to learn from, and hopefully pretty soon there should be some legible bits of text. With the
So in a
first roll,
sense, oh
sorry,
yeah, I was
with
going to
the
say, so in a
first,
sense, you start teaching it what ink is, then you start teaching it what different letters are so that it can get to the blurrier parts and hopefully start to identify the letters in the blurrier parts.
so we're not, if I've understood correctly, we're not teaching it what the letters look like. We're
Okay.
just teaching it
Teaching it
what
what
the
ink
ink
looks like.
looks like.
Okay.
And the idea is that we're trying to prevent it from hallucinating Greek, right?
Yes.
It might, decide that something is ink that isn't,
Hmm.
but that'll just look like a dot, and we can ignore that. But if it starts thinking that letters should come in a certain order, right, then it causes havoc for reading
Aha.
the
So
Greek.
what it does for you is it doesn't actually produce any sort of transcription or anything.
Nope,
It
it
just
just
makes with
fluoresces
more contrast.
it
It creates an
just
image with more
highlights the ink.
contrast of what it thinks ink is versus papyrus background.
Yeah, that's
Okay.
all it's doing.
Okay, that makes sense. I
Um,
did not realize that. That's actually kind of interesting. And then it ends up as an image where you can start saying, actually, that's probably not ink, so you can scrub it away or something like that, and then you can start transcribing and stuff
yeah,
like that and
yeah,
analyzing.
and I can read. It gives me enough Greek to work with that I can fill in gaps of a letter or two here, or figure out what the sense must be across a hole or something like that. But yeah, the AI is just to make the ink appear.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That makes
Um,
sense. So how much material, how many readable things have you gotten from them so far?
in this role, a couple words, a few
Couple
dozen words, plus the
Okay.
title. But it's getting better. It's getting better every time I see an image.
Okay.
Um, so the first
What's
one, like those first images, we read like three partial words, um, and like we have now like three or four complete lines from different parts of the role. So it doesn't produce connected sense. Um, right, nothing, like we don't have sentences that we can translate, but more words every time. Um,
Yeah,
we're getting
each
closer and
time
closer
it's
to
filling
having
in.
translatable bits.
So what's the most exciting thing for you that has come out of it? What is there something that you saw that was like cool?
I mean, yeah. So like, I moved to Naples in January of 2013, and I got my tour of the library, and I saw the papyri in person for the first time, and and then they showed me a drawer full of the ones that were still rolled up, and of course I asked, and it turns out everybody asks, like, Oh, have you tried X-raying them? You put
No
you put 'em
shit, Sherlock.
Yeah, exactly. They're a lot more polite about it than that, but, like, yeah, basically everybody's like, "Yeah," everybody asks if they've X-rayed them.
Yeah.
So for me, just I worked on this material for over a decade before we got the first results from the
Mhm.
Vesuvius challenge, and I'd watched like 3 or 4 other teams try some kind of scanning and digital unrolling techniques, and some of them looked really good until you actually like dug into the data, and it turned out that it was like screwy or not
Gibberish,
acceptable
yeah.
in one way or another. It just didn't, not because anybody was faking it or anything, but just because like,
Yeah.
dark
It
fibers
looked
sometimes.
like magical papyri with fake words on it.
Yeah, or like a dark fiber looks like ink.
Yeah.
So 3 dark fibers in the right configuration looks like letters, right?
Okay.
Um, it's unfortunate, but it's a so actually reading words, right? If we right, when I saw the porphyros, the purple from the first grand prize challenge,
Mhm,
right,
mhm.
that was like, that was mind blowing. It was amazing. Um, the next big thing is going to be when I can like read a whole sentence. For me, that's the next big milestone.
Okay.
Um, reading a whole sentence
Are
myself.
you gonna give us a prediction on when you'll be able to read a whole sentence?
Oh, that's a sort of
You can be wrong. It's
tempt
just a
not the
guess.
fates kind of thing. Uh, I, phew, I think one sentence probably by the end of the year.
Okay, that's good.
I think I'll be able to read a sentence by the end of the year.
All right.
That's a guess based on how fast progress seems to be going and assuming that it keeps going at the same pace.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Okay, so do you have anything you want to wrap up on, and then can we move to a little bit of Q&A? There were some good questions in the chat, and I have a few from my patrons.
I think that's mostly it.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm happy to do Q&A.
Yeah, so just a note that if you are a patron on Patreon or a channel member, you get advanced access to ask questions, and I will promise to always ask the questions submitted. So we have 2 from here. How does this technology relate to the bigger questions about the role of AI in research and education? Which I guess this isn't really AI, but it's related. So yeah.
Yeah. I guess they call it a machine learning algorithm.
Okay.
I don't know if that's a technical difference from what everybody's calling AI, or if they just don't want to get it confused with like Chat GTP. Uh, yeah, so the questions about the chatbot style AIs are stuff like, should students be allowed to use them? Should we be incorporating that into the classroom? Um, what if students hand in papers written by Chat GTP instead of writing them themselves? This kind of stuff just isn't. It's just not that. It's totally different. It's a really narrow application. We're not using anybody else's training data to train it, right? We're finding the ink and training it on the ink that we find. So there's none of the plagiarism worries about like Chat GTP. Incidentally, my books were stolen for that too.
Yeah, I
So
know, because that's one of the big ethical issues with this AI is that plagiarism aspect. And I mean, I just also want to point out that there's other similar machine learning being done to identify and classify archaeological artifacts, for example. And it's really just using technology to be able to see how computers can identify different things like ink in this case. So it's
yeah,
not AI, I think is probably the right way to put it. But then again, I don't really think most AI is actually
yeah.
intelligent in any way to classify as AI.
I mean, I don't. Yeah, yeah. I mean, I'm a pretty firm believer in knowing how to do things for yourself before you start taking the shortcuts. But I don't think don't think the machine learning algorithm is really relevant to that.
Yeah, and certainly I think what you're showing is you need to have trained papyrologists who are familiar with reading papyrological material to actually be able to deal with the data that this machine learning provides for you.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, which is why we have you on, because you're that person.
yeah.
Okay, what about the second one on the, I guess, the ethics of this? Since I guess the bulk of the funding from the project comes from the Musk Foundation. Is that
Yeah,
true, first of all?
yeah. I think he or his foundation donated over $2 million, which is going, the
It
sponsors,
was a big one.
2,050,000 or something like that.
84,000, I think it is.
84,
Yeah.
So it's what the Vesuvius Challenge is a charity. It's acting in, I think I can say, the public good. I think getting this material accessible and legible is an academic and public good. And the Vesuvius Challenge is grateful for all its donors. If people are, it doesn't have a political agenda or anything. The workflow is extremely technical. It's just when somebody makes a prize submission, it goes to the computer people, and they, do a technical review. Does it actually do what the contestant claims it does? And then if it involves ink or Greek, it comes to the papyrologists, and we're told, the contestant says this is a title, or the contestant says this is letters. What do you guys
I have
think?
a question. Is there any role that so I mean, look, obviously you have to worry about the role of private money influencing results. That's obviously something that's discussed for medicine and big pharma
Right.
and stuff like that. Is there any role that the donors have in sort of influencing the results in any sort of sense, or the day-to-day protocols that are going on?
No, I don't think so.
So you've never had a call from Elon saying like,
No.
"Hey, dude, you got to fucking translate this right now and say that it says blah."
Yeah, no, because so all the technical stuff is open access. That's all posted on the website and available through the Discord, so it can be checked by anybody. All the papyrological stuff has to convince the papyrological team, so we do a papyrological review. That's independent. Nobody. I get a report. When they send it to me, they tell me what the person claims it is, but nobody says like, it's your job to find a title here or anything like that. If people were exerting political pressure, we'd be finding much more interesting stuff.
Yeah, perhaps. I mean, it's a complicated scenario with all the public funds going away, which is partly due to Elon fucking Musk, for research, with the major reorganization that was announced yesterday for the NSF and the NEH, which has also funded this project. I think the NSF and the NEH have, or one of them did, I think I saw. It sort of does create this kind of catch-22 of how to fund legitimate research, and a lot of private donations from people that are sometimes politically opposed to higher education. They still donate to higher education, so it's such a weird catch-22.
Yeah. So again, also, I guess it's worth emphasizing, the Vesuvius Challenge is a charity. It has a legal organization. It has a legal structure. It has a board. There are the people in the team with jobs. Right. It's not just, somebody's, hobby or
Yeah.
influence operation or anything.
Okay, let's move to a few questions in the chat. I will tell people to post some more, but I starred some that came up during the chat. This one I thought was interesting. Given the time of year they were preserved, do these roles and other findings give us an idea of literacy of the people living there?
Probably not. They're probably not telling us anything that we didn't know already. Okay. So the villa is one of, if not the largest private residence known from the Roman world. We knew that Roman elites were literate. We knew that they also used Greek pretty fluently as a second language, the way that French used to be used in a lot of Europe. Finding a bunch of, Greek and Latin texts in a gigantic villa like this just isn't too surprising. For questions about sort of normal people literacy, the graffiti from Pompeii and Herculaneum are much more informative. But
Okay.
some rich
Yeah, of
guy's
course,
private library just isn't telling us much about that kind of general question.
I definitely have a video that I hope I'll get done by the end of the year on graffiti at Pompeii, but that's going to take some time. A lot of videos.
Yeah.
Okay, there's another question actually from the same person, which I think is interesting. Would libraries in this area keep copies from other libraries? As in, did knowledge disseminate from library to library? Obviously, this library is not a good example because it's the only copy of some of these things.
Well,
but,
yeah.
In general,
it wouldn't have been the only copy that ever existed.
No. I just
It's
meant
just
we have
new
so
to us.
tell us.
So libraries in the ancient world don't seem to have been lending libraries sort of on the modern American model. But what would happen is, sometimes, you would lend a book to a friend. But what would happen mostly is, remember, these are all slaveholding societies, right? The elites own slaves. They own educated, trained slaves. What would happen is somebody would write and say, do you have a copy of, I don't know, Philodemus on the Gods, book 3? And the guy says, yes, I do. I'll have my copyist make a copy and send it to you. So the physical book, your copy of the physical book would never leave your library, but a copy of it would travel.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah. Let's see. There are a few non-records regarding agriculture, ceramic, or metalworking practices or techniques. They might look like science notes in context. Is there any? I mean, there's other texts that certainly talk about agriculture, not as much about ceramics and metalworking, but yeah.
Not in the Herculaneum papyri.
Yeah.
So Philodemus is on the text that we call the On Household Management, talks about agriculture, but in a very mile-high perspective, right? So if you own farmland, how do you spend the income from your farmland? It's not about like the techniques of farming or planting or anything like that. It's about like the ethics of being a wealthy person.
And to be honest, even the ancient texts we have that do describe things like how to farm, they're also very much wrapped up in the ethics and the of how to present yourself as a good farmer.
Yeah.
Rather than
right. Yeah. There are like a columella.
Yeah,
it does have some actual useful agricultural advice, but not in the Herculaneum papyri. We find some of this stuff elsewhere. Like we have like apprenticeship contracts in the Egyptian papyri, and like purchase orders and receipts and complaints and stuff, and we can learn a fair bit from those sort of incidentally. But the Herculaneum papyri are primarily Greek philosophical texts.
Yeah, we were talking a bit about this with Sarah Bond and thinking about labor in the ancient world for people that are interested in an earlier conversation, and we were looking at some of the Egyptian papyri that talk about that kind of stuff. Let's see, here's a good one. Was anything ever used to roll onto, like a round piece of wood or something like that?
Yep, not always, but sometimes. In fact, like exactly a round piece of wood. Either one sort of long, thin one, like a dowel rod, or two shorter ones, one at either end. They would be used to help roll up the papyri, and also we think to block the center from to prevent like insects from getting in, like bookworms.
Okay. Huh.
Stuff.
Interesting. Okay. So the internet apparently says these scrolls may be 10 meters long. Is that what we're looking at when we look at that on World Scroll?
That seems to be the average in Herculaneum.
That's crazy. That's really cool. It's
Some of them seem to get to about 20 meters.
Huh. Wow.
Some of them are clearly much shorter than that.
Okay.
But yeah, so that you would, sorry, gotta
Okay.
not whack my laptop. You could just glue papyrus to itself. So if you have a 10-meter long roll and you're writing a lot, you could just glue another 5 meters to it or whatever.
And roll it up. It's a thicker roll. Yeah.
Yeah. Or if you have a 10-meter roll and you only write 5 meters worth of text, you just cut it and have another 5 meters for some other use.
It's a shame. I saw some people up above saying it's a shame it was excavated so early, but for that reason, now I'm thinking about like the layout of these things. Do we have any sense of how these scrolls were stored in those spaces? Were they sort of like shelved in something, or do we have no sense because it was dug so long ago?
We actually have a pretty good sense. The dig diaries are remarkably detailed. So we know that some of them were found on shelves. Some were found in crates. Some were found in little sort of carrying capsules. Some were apparently like loose on the floor. That might be because they were, like knocked off a table during the eruption or something like that. Presumably they weren't just tossed on the floor and left there normally. So yeah, we have a good idea of the possibilities of storage. Normally they would have been shelved.
Okay, that makes sense. Another question: are the scanned scrolls open data?
I believe so.
Okay. Probably on the Vesuvius Challenge website.
Yeah, they'll be linked through there. It's probably, I mean, the actual data is probably stored on GitHub or or something like that. But yeah, and if you want to get involved in the Vesuvius Challenge, there's a whole Discord channel with like tutorials. You can download the programs used to do the unrolling and ink detection. Take a look at the prizes. There are prizes for lots of stuff other than like finding letters, right? Technical improvements to the programs. If you can make a program run faster or glitch out less frequently, they'll write you a check for that. And if you do that often enough, they'll offer you a job, it turns out. So.
Okay. What is the future with the incorporation of, again, I don't like AI, but machine learning is probably a better way to put it. Beforehand, you were telling me that you knew of other projects that were using machine learning. What else? What other projects are going on?
So the one that I'm most familiar with is in Italy, and it's a program that will use machine learning to learn handwriting styles and the fiber structures of pieces of papyrus so that it can scan a database of images and suggest that fragments belong together, either on the basis of fiber matches or handwriting matches.
Yeah. So I want to emphasize to people that this kind of research actually goes back to the very earliest application of computers in archaeology. So back in the like 1960s, when we're talking giant computers, right, with like punch cards and shit like that, researchers at the University of Pennsylvania, what they did was there's these temples that Akhenaten built in Egypt. And he sort of stopped worshiping the old gods and was worshiping the new gods. And so after his reign, Egypt went back to the old gods, and they tore apart his temple, and they displaced the blocks from his temple all over Egypt. So to be able to reconstruct the iconography, how do you do that? They have all these blocks that excavate. And so people were taking photographs of these in the 50s and 60s. And then they actually identified where the lines would go off the blocks. And then they programmed them into punch cards and used the punch cards to have the computer predict which blocks might connect with other blocks in order to put together the whole iconography of the Akhenaten temple program. So, in many ways, that's like machine learning in the 60s is to be able to do that kind of stuff. And so this kind of stuff actually happens in archaeology all the time, from the way we use photogrammetry to create 3D reconstructions, to people trying to now start to identify artifacts or whatever by training using machine learning on photographs of artifacts or databases of things. So in many ways, I want to emphasize that some of this stuff, while it seems so new, archaeologists have been doing very similar stuff for many, many decades, and they will continue to do very similar things for the foreseeable future, and it will improve our ability to look at the past, if you see what I mean. So yeah, I just wanted to emphasize that it's not just, we like to think of this stuff as all brand spanking funky new, and but people have been doing this kind of cool stuff for a long time, innovative ways to try to put together the past and use a computer to read what you have, right? If you see what I mean. And that also required a lot of manual checking, that Akhenaten project, to make sure that, the computer predicts these two blocks go together. Let's actually see, and it was successful. And okay, I think, let me see if there are any more recent questions that came in. Am I missing any?
Yeah, I mean, I see a bunch I can just sort of scroll down and answer them.
Yeah, if you see one.
Yeah. Did the libraries have a list of the scrolls that are stored there? Some of them did. If this one did, we haven't found it, but some ancient libraries did have lists of the holdings. Scroll makers had a standard length. Yeah, they seems like papyrus was manufactured to a standard length, but that did not mean that people only wrote books of that length. Right, as I said, you can write less and just cut off the end. You can write more and glue sheets on as you need them. But they do seem to have been manufactured to a standard length. Any chance that we can find?
I can help answer this one if you want, because I'm writing about this, because this relates to Atlantis.
Yeah. I don't think it was ever written.
Yeah, so. I don't think it was ever written. I don't think the Critias was ever finished. And,
yeah, Critias was definitely not. Critias ends at the middle of a sentence.
Yeah, exactly.
It's just not done.
But no, good question. Meat Eater is a longtime channel member and patron, so it's like, it's a good question. But no, with most philologists and scholars of ancient philosophy think that it was just never finished. It's not lost. So yeah.
I mean, there's another case with the Plato's Sophist and Statesman, where it looks like, based on something said at the beginning of the Sophist, it looks like there should be a third dialogue in the trilogy called The Philosopher. No trace of it. No trace it ever existed. And in fact, there's a story that seems borne out by the Greek data that Plato died before finishing the Laws. And this is why there's Plato's Laws and a work called the Epinomis, which means after the Laws, written by Plato's student Philip of Opus. So Philip edited Plato's Laws and wrote the conclusion because Plato had died before finishing it himself.
Very cool. And we have an easy one to end on.
Sure.
How amazing and fascinating is it to find or study an artifact or papyrus so old knowing an ancient human handled it?
Oh man, it's great. It kind of I kind of get used to it after a little while and forget, and then I'll like, I'll go away from Naples. I won't go to the library for a while, and I'll come back and be like, oh my God, I'm really here. Yeah, it's pretty spectacular, and it. Sometimes I forget that because I do it sort of every day, but yeah, it's pretty awesome.
Cool. All right. Well, thank you all. That should hopefully clear up most of our thoughts. Somebody, I guess, just really quickly asked, is it surprising it's Greek and not Latin?
For ancient philosophy, not really. Cicero, when he starts writing philosophy in Latin, has to spend a lot of time saying, like, look, I know all the purists think that you should only do philosophy in ancient Greek, but I think Latin can handle it too. Um, so that's not too surprising.
Cool. All
Yeah.
right. Well, thank you so much, Michael. It's a pleasure to have you and chat with you.
Yeah, thanks for
And
having me on.
thank you all for showing up. Make sure to leave a like and a comment after the stream to help appease Jupiter up there so that people go and watch this. So thank you all.
Yep.
Oh, wait. I have to end with my theme song. I always got to end with this. What am I talking about? Somebody, RM Brown, he's a YouTuber. He made this awesome theme song for me.
Hi, my name is Flint, and I'm an archaeologist.
It's pretty cool, so I'm going to go on his channel.
Rhymes and riddles, tickle, tickle, giggles, squiggle, jiggle, fiddle, Flint on Tibble. Rhymes and riddles, tickle, tickle, giggles, squiggle, jiggle, fiddle, fibble, 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 fibble.
Exactly, rocking out.